The champagne-colored silk duvet was the first thing that told me something was wrong. I'd been staring at hospital ceilings for so long that the soft, familiar weave of this fabric felt alien against my fingers. The second clue was the scent, peonies, fresh cut, sitting in a crystal vase on the nightstand that I'd bought from a boutique in Carmel 3 years ago. The third was the weight of a ring on my left hand. I lifted it. The diamond caught the California morning light, sparkling like a cruel joke. I shot upright in bed, my heart hammering. My body moved easily, no tubes, no monitors, no dull ache in my bones from months of bed rest. I swung my legs over the edge and caught my reflection in the vanity mirror across the room. Younger. Fuller cheeks. No dark circles bruising the skin beneath my eyes. The date on my phone confirmed it. 3 years. I'd been given 3 years back that the shower was running in the master bath. Through the steam-frosted glass, I could see Liam's silhouette, his off-key humming drifting out like a mockingbird's tune. I knew what came next. I'd lived this day before, had replayed it in my hospital bed 1,000 times, memorizing every detail, every inflection, every quiet cruelty dressed up as a necessary inconvenience. He'd step out, towel around his waist, and he'd tell me he had to go to the office. The Henderson merger was hitting a snag, he'd say. His mother would understand, he'd say. I'd be left alone to host the Williams family feast for 6 hours while he played hero at his desk, coming home just in time to eat the food I'd slaved over and compliment his mother's pie. The shower cut off. I was already standing by the closet, my bare feet pressed into the cool hardwood, when the door swung open. Steam rolled out around Liam's shoulders. He looked exactly as I remembered, dark hair slicked back, jaw clean-shaven, that lopsided smile that had made me fall for him during our sophomore year of college. He grabbed a towel and dried his hair, completely oblivious that, "Hey, babe," he said, patting toward me. "You're up early." He kissed my forehead, that casual peck of ownership, and started toward his dresser. "Look, I know the Williams lunch is in a few hours, but I got a call from Derek. The Henderson merger is." "No." The word came out flat, hollow, like it had been excavated from a tomb. That he paused, his hand frozen over the drawer handle. "Sorry, you're not going to the office," I said. I pulled my phone from the nightstand and held it up. His text thread with Derek was already open, the draft message half-typed. He'd been planning this since yesterday. Probably even before then. "And the lunch is cancelled." He blinked. Then he laughed, that short, incredulous bark that always made me feel like a child who'd said something accidentally clever. "Sophie, come on. My mom's been planning this for weeks. She's bringing her apple pie. My dad has new cigars. You know how important these gatherings are to them." "They're important to you," I corrected. "And I am not doing this anymore." The smile faded. Something flickered in his eyes, confusion, then irritation, then something uglier that he quickly tamped down. "What's gotten into you? Did you have a nightmare? You're not making any sense." I walked past him into the closet and pulled a linen sundress from the back, one I'd bought and never worn because Eleanor had commented that the color washed me out. I slipped it over my head, the fabric cool against my skin, feeling more like armor than anything I'd ever worn. "Your mother doesn't love me, Liam," I said, turning to face him. "She tolerates me. She tolerates the way I set the table and the way I nod along during her monologues. She tolerates me because I keep her son happy and I never talk back. But I'm done." He followed me down the stairs, his bare feet slapping on the marble tiles. The kitchen was pristine, stainless steel gleaming, a marble island that cost more than my first car, and a platter of crudité I'd prepped the night before still wrapped in plastic. The brisket was in the fridge, ready to start its 7-hour journey. I grabbed my keys from the hook. "Sophie, you're being irrational," he said, his voice dropping into that patronizing tone that made my skin crawl. "This isn't how adults handle things. You're humiliating me in front of my family." "What's humiliating," I said, "is being married to someone who treats me like a household appliance. A walking, talking, meal prepping appliance that smiles on command. I don't need you, Liam." I don't need any of them. He slammed his palm against the wall beside my head. The sound cracked through the quiet kitchen, sharp and violent. You are being a selfish brat, he hissed, his face inches from mine. Do you have any idea what my mother is going to say? She's going to blame me. She's going to say I married beneath me, and she'll be right. I stared at him. The man I'd loved. The man who'd left me alone in a hospital bed for 4 straight weeks while he was too swamped to visit. The man who'd come back just long enough to sign divorce papers while I was too weak to fight. And I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no longing. Just a vast, silent emptiness where my heart used to be. Let her blame you, I said. Let her call the whole family and complain about her ungrateful daughter-in-law. I don't care. I am done caring. I pulled the door open. The sun hit my face, warm and golden, carrying the scent of jasmine from the garden. He called my name from the doorway, his voice cracking. I didn't turn back. I was halfway down the cobblestone path when his phone rang. His mother's ringtone, that delicate piano melody he'd chosen because he thought it made him look sentimental. I heard him answer, his voice frantic and low, trying to smooth over a situation he hadn't anticipated. I got into my car and started the engine. The front door slammed behind me. Then came the crash, something heavy shattering against the floor. Probably the vase of peonies I'd bought myself because he'd never thought to buy me flowers. I sat in the driver's seat, my hands gripping the steering wheel, and I laughed. It was a raw, broken sound that turned into a sob. 3 years I'd lived in that house, suffocating under the weight of his expectations and his family's judgment. 3 years I'd kept my mouth shut, smoothed things over, taken the high road. And the moment I refused to perform, he'd thrown a tantrum like a child whose toy had been taken away. I drove without thinking. The farmer's market was 15 minutes away, but I took a left instead, heading toward the coast. The Pacific stretched out before me, blue and endless, a reminder that the world was bigger than the walls of his house. I parked at a lookout and sat there for a long time, watching the waves crash against the rocks below. My phone buzzed in my purse. Liam. Then his mother. Then Liam again, 3 more times in rapid succession. I pulled it out and watched the notifications pile up, each one a demand, each one an implicit assertion that my time, my energy, my existence wasn't my own. I turned the phone off and shoved it in the glove compartment. The next few hours were surreal. I bought coffee from a food truck and walked along the boardwalk, watching families build sandcastles and teenagers laugh too loudly. I listened to the seagulls. I felt the wind in my hair. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like I could breathe without someone telling me how to. By the time I drove back, the sun was low in the sky, bleeding orange and pink across the horizon. The neighborhood was quiet, manicured lawns and pristine driveways. Our house looked like a fortress, all Mediterranean arches and terracotta tiles, but the blinds in the living room were askew. Through the gap, I could see them. Liam on the sofa, head in his hands. Eleanor perched on the armchair like a queen awaiting tribute. James by the fireplace, arms crossed, silent as always. And Miles, the smug parasite, scrolling through his phone with that insufferable smirk. They were all waiting for me. I walked in, and the air turned thick. Accusatory. Eleanor stood first, her heels clicking against the marble. Sophie. Her voice could have frozen wine. We've been waiting for hours. Care to explain yourself? I closed the door behind me, the latch clicking softly. I looked at Liam. His eyes were red-rimmed, his shirt rumpled, his expression a desperate plea that used to work on me like a charm. Then I looked at his mother. At the entitlement in her posture, the judgment in her eyes, the total, absolute conviction that I owed her something. I smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind of smile I'd seen in the mirror of a hospital bathroom, right before the divorce papers arrived. Actually, I said, walking past them into the kitchen, I don't think I owe you an explanation at all. But since you're all here, I'll make it simple. I'm done. I'm done with the lunches, the dinners, the passive-aggressive comments, the fake smiles, and the silent treatment. I'm done being a wife who doesn't feel like a wife. And I'm definitely done with this family. Eleanor's face drained of color. How dare you speak to me like that? I dare because I have nothing left to lose, I said, pouring myself a glass of white wine from the fridge. The liquid was cold, crisp, perfect. And that, Eleanor, is the most dangerous thing a woman can be. Liam shot to his feet. Sophie, let's talk. In private. No. I shook my head. We're done talking. I want a divorce. I want half of everything, and I want you to stay as far away from me as humanly possible. The room went silent. The kind of silence that presses against your eardrums. Miles broke it first, a sharp bark of laughter that earned him a venomous glare from Eleanor. She's serious, bro, he said, leaning back in his chair. She's actually doing it. Shut up, Miles, Liam snapped at me, Miles muttered, but he stood, grabbing his jacket that I walked to the front door and pulled it open. You heard me. Get out. All of you. Eleanor gathered her purse, her eyes shooting daggers at me. You'll regret this, Sophie. You have no idea what you're throwing away. I know exactly what I'm throwing away, I said, watching them file out. A cage with a gilded lock. James paused at the threshold. His eyes met mine, and for a fraction of a second, I thought I saw something, grudging respect, maybe. Then it was gone, replaced by his usual stoic mask. The door closed. Silenced, I stood in the foyer, listening to the engine start, watching through the window as they pulled out of the driveway one by one. Liam's black Audi. Eleanor's silver Mercedes. James's truck. Miles's flashy sports car. They disappeared around the corner, and I was alone. I walked to the kitchen and picked up my wine glass. The house was too big, too quiet, too full of memories I wanted to burn. I carried my glass up the stairs and into my studio, the small room at the back of the house that I'd claimed as my own. Sketches covered the walls. Half-finished digital illustrations glowed on the monitors. Old portfolios stacked in the corner, gathering dust. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. The screen glowed to life, illuminating the dark room. I opened a browser and searched for divorce attorneys, highly rated, aggressive, expensive. I found 3 and saved their numbers. Then I drafted an email to my clients, letting them know I was available for new projects, ready to rebuild a career I'd let slip through my fingers. And then I sat back and looked out the window. The stars were emerging, pinpricks of light in the darkening sky above my gilded cage. The universe felt infinite and new. I thought about that hospital bed. The cold sheets. The endless hours of silence. The way I'd watched the door, hoping he'd walk through it, and how he never did. I thought about the divorce papers he'd had served to me in that room, like I was an inconvenience he needed to clear off his calendar. I thought about the way my heart had shattered, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but a hollow ache. And I thought about the second chance I'd just been handed. I raised my glass to the stars and took a slow sip. The wine was dry and clean, sharp on my tongue. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know how to navigate the legal nightmare ahead, or how to rebuild my life from the ashes of this marriage. But I knew one thing with absolute, bone-deep certainty. This time, I wasn't going to let anyone put me back in that cage. I woke up the next morning to the sound of my phone buzzing against the nightstand. 6 missed calls from Liam. 4 from Eleanor. 2 from an unknown number that I ignored out of pure instinct. I rolled over and stared at the ceiling, a massive plaster medallion with a crystal chandelier hanging from its center, and I felt the strangest sensation. Peace. It was foreign and fragile, like a snowflake I was terrified to breathe on. I didn't get out of bed right away. I lay there and let myself feel the sheets against my skin, the morning light filtering through the curtains, the absence of that constant low hum of anxiety I'd carried for years. The house was quiet. No footsteps pacing downstairs. No passive-aggressive texts from Eleanor about the seating arrangement. No Liam popping his head in to tell me he had to cancel our plans because something urgent had come up. I reached for my phone and finally looked at the messages. Liam's first text was frantic. "Sophie, please call me. We need to talk." The second was angry. "You can't just walk out on lunch like that. My mom is devastated." The third was desperate. "I love you. Please just come home so we can figure this out." The fourth was cold. "If you don't respond by tonight, I'm calling my lawyer." Eleanor's texts were predictably venomous. "You have humiliated this family. I hope you're proud of yourself. Your mother raised you better than this. I knew you were wrong for my son from the very beginning." I read them all with the same detached curiosity I'd read a novel about someone else's life. 3 years ago, these messages would have sent me spiraling. I would have called Eleanor back, apologized profusely, promised to make it up to her. I would have groveled until she deigned to forgive me, and then I would have spent the next month walking on eggshells, trying to prove I was worthy of belonging to the illustrious Williams family. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I didn't have the energy to be that woman anymore, and I didn't have the desire. I deleted the messages without responding and went downstairs to make coffee. The kitchen was still pristine, the crudité platter still wrapped in plastic on the counter, the brisket still sitting in the fridge. I pulled the meat out and tossed it in the trash. Then I unwrapped the vegetables and dumped them too. It felt symbolic, purging the last remnants of a feast I'd never serve. I brewed a pot of dark roast and sat at the island with my laptop, scrolling through the list of divorce attorneys I'd saved. The first one was a woman named Mariana Cruz. Her website was sleek and professional, her bio full of aggressive language about fighting for her clients' rights. I called her office and got through to a receptionist who sounded surprised to hear from me on a Saturday. I explained my situation quickly, quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. She said someone would call me back on Monday morning. That was 2 days away. 2 days of sitting in this empty house, surrounded by all the things I'd accumulated during a marriage I was now actively dismantling. I looked around the kitchen and saw Eleanor's fingerprints everywhere. The china in the hutch she'd insisted was an heirloom. The crystal stemware she'd purchased for our wedding, claiming I didn't understand the importance of proper glassware. The monogram towels in the powder room that she'd gifted me as a housewarming present, my initials embroidered in a font she'd chosen without asking. I made a decision. I wasn't going to spend 2 days marinating in her presence. I was going to get out of this house and start figuring out what my life looked like without Liam, without Eleanor, without the crushing weight of expectations I'd never asked for. I showered and dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, the kind of simple outfit Eleanor had always subtly disapproved of. I grabbed my keys and drove to a coffee shop downtown, a place I used to go before I got married, when I was still Sophie Kim, graphic designer with a future and a spine. The barista recognized me, which was surprising. I hadn't been there in years. "Sophie." She was a young woman with pink hair and a nose ring, her name tag reading Tessa. "I haven't seen you in forever. How have you been?" The question was so simple, so normal, and I nearly burst into tears. I swallowed hard and forced a smile. "Better," I said. "I'm doing better." I ordered a latte and sat by the window, watching the street come to life. Couples walked hand in hand. A mother pushed a stroller while her toddler threw a tantrum about something trivial. An old man sat on a bench feeding pigeons, his face peaceful and content. I missed this. The ordinariness of it. The way life happened without requiring a performance. My phone buzzed again. Liam. I silenced it and tucked it into my bag. An hour later, I was in my studio, staring at a blank canvas on my tablet. I'd been so busy managing the Williams family's expectations, so consumed with being the perfect wife, that I'd let my work atrophy. I hadn't taken on a new client in months. I'd rejected projects because they'd conflict with family dinners or holiday obligations. I'd convinced myself that being a good wife meant subsuming my career, my identity, my everything into the role they'd carved out for me. I started sketching. Just shapes at first, nothing concrete. Then a figure emerged, a woman standing at the edge of a cliff, her back to the viewer, the ocean spread out before her like an invitation. I worked for hours, losing myself in the process. When I finally looked up, The sun was setting outside my window and my phone was glowing with a dozen more missed notifications that I ignored all of them except one. Mariana Cruz's office had sent a follow-up email confirming a consultation Monday morning at 9. I replied with a brief acknowledgement and went back to my sketch. The doorbell rang at 7 o'clock. I froze, my stylus hovering over the screen. It couldn't be Liam. He had a key. But he'd also made a habit of announcing himself instead of just walking in, a power play he'd adopted after his mother told him that a husband should never enter a house unannounced, it's bad manners. I crept to the top of the stairs and peered down through the railing. The frosted glass panel beside the front door showed a silhouette I didn't recognize. I went down slowly, my heart racing. I'd never been afraid in this house before, but tonight, with everything so unsettled, the familiar walls felt foreign and threatening. I pulled the door open a crack. A woman stood on the porch. She was tall and sharp-featured, with dark hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail and a tailored blazer that screamed money. Her smile was polite but careful, professional. Sophie Kim, she asked. Yes, sorry to intrude. I'm Vivian Park. I don't know if you remember me, but I used to be your neighbor. The Park family, for houses down. I squinted at her. The memory surfaced slowly. Vivian Park, an older woman who'd moved away a couple of years ago, the one who'd always waved from her garden and brought over cookies during the holidays. I'd barely known her, just a friendly face in a neighborhood full of polite strangers. Hi, I said, still on edge. What are you doing here? I saw the chaos yesterday, she said bluntly. I was walking my dog when the Williams family stormed out. Eleanor looked like she was about to combust. I figured things might be complicated. I opened the door wider, unsure whether to be grateful or alarmed. You could say that. I'm not here to pry, she said, holding up her hands. But I also know how the Williams family operates. I had the misfortune of working with James's firm a decade ago. The man is ruthless, and his wife is worse. If you're going through something, you're going to need people on your side who aren't them. I stared at her. A perfect stranger, offering solidarity in the most unexpected way. Something in my chest loosened, just a fraction. I'm getting divorced, I said. The words felt strange and liberating, like the first step off a ledge. Vivian nodded slowly. I figured as much. Well, if you need anything, legal referrals, emotional support, a place to crash when the house gets too loud, I'm around. She reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out a business card. I'm a family law consultant, actually. I work with a lot of women in your situation. The first consultation is on me. I took the card, my fingers trembling slightly. Thank you. I don't know what to say. Say you'll call me if you need help, she said. And Sophie, whatever happens, don't let them make you feel small. That's their favorite tactic. Eleanor will try to tear you down until you believe you deserve the treatment she's giving you. She's a master at it. But you don't have to let her. I nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. Vivian left as quickly as she'd arrived, disappearing into the twilight. I closed the door and leaned against it, the business card clutched in my palm. Vivian Park, family law consultant. I didn't know if she was an ally or just another piece of a puzzle I hadn't figured out yet, but the gesture alone was enough to quiet some of the noise in my head. I went back upstairs and looked at my sketch again. The woman on the cliff was almost finished. I added a few details, a strong wind pulling at her hair, a small smile on her face, the first sign of hope in a canvas that had started as empty as I felt that my phone buzzed again. I picked it up, expecting another desperate message from Liam. Instead, it was a text from an unknown number. I opened it, and the blood drained from my face. Sophie, this is James. I'd like to speak with you privately. Don't tell Liam or Eleanor. It's important. Call me James Williams. The silent patriarch who'd barely acknowledged my existence for 3 years. The father-in-law who'd said maybe 10 words to me total. He wanted to speak with me privately. And he didn't want his family to know that. I stared at the screen for a long moment, my mind racing. What could James possibly want? The man was a ghost in his own home, always present but never engaged. He'd never shown a shred of warmth toward me, never offered a kind word or a gesture of support. He just sat there in his leather armchair, sipping whiskey, watching his wife dismantle my confidence piece by piece. A trap, I thought. This has to be a trap. Eleanor had put him up to it. They were going to try to gaslight me, pressure me, convince me I was making the biggest mistake of my life. But something in the text felt different. James had never initiated contact with me. He'd never called, never texted, never written. The man communicated through grunts and silences. Why would he break that pattern now, unless he genuinely had something to say? I typed back a single line. When and where? The reply came within seconds. Tomorrow morning. The Bluebird Cafe on Maple. 10 o'clock. Come alone. I set the phone down and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow. I was meeting my father-in-law in secret to discuss something he didn't want his family to know about. Whatever was coming, I knew with absolute certainty that I was walking into a storm. The question was whether I'd come out the other side intact. I looked back at my sketch. The woman on the cliff stood at the precipice, her back to the abyss, her face lifted toward the sun. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't backing down. She was ready to leap. I closed my tablet and went to bed. Tomorrow, I'd meet James Williams. Tomorrow, I'd find out what he had to say. And maybe, just maybe, I'd discover that even in the Williams family, there were cracks in the foundation I could exploit. But as I lay in the dark, staring at the shadows on the ceiling, a cold realization crept into my chest. James was calling me privately. Not his son. Not his wife. Me. That meant he knew something. Something they didn't know. Something he was willing to break his silence to reveal. And the only reason a man like James Williams would break his silence was if the consequences were bigger than anything I could imagine. The Bluebird Cafe was exactly the kind of place I'd never pictured James Williams setting foot in. It was small and slightly run down, with mismatched chairs and a faded awning that had seen better decades. The coffee was cheap, the pastries were greasy, and the clientele consisted mostly of elderly regulars who sat in the same booths every morning, nursing their cups and reading newspapers printed on actual paper. It was the polar opposite of the sterile, expensive country clubs where the Williams family conducted their social business. I arrived at 9:55, early enough to claim a table by the window where I could see the entrance. My hands were shaking slightly, and I pressed them flat against the Formica tabletop to steady them. I'd barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw James's text, the words repeating themselves like a warning siren. Don't tell Liam or Eleanor. It's important that he walked in at exactly 10 o'clock. I almost didn't recognize him. James Williams without his family was a different creature entirely. He was still tall and broad-shouldered, still wearing a crisp button-down shirt and slacks that probably cost more than my monthly rent, but there was something softer in his posture. His shoulders were slightly hunched. His hands were shoved deep in his pockets. He looked less like the patriarch of an empire and more like a tired old man who'd been carrying a weight for far too long. He spotted me and walked over, sliding into the booth across from me without a greeting. He signaled the waitress for black coffee, then turned his gaze on me. Those pale gray eyes I'd always found so cold and unreadable. Up close, I could see the exhaustion in them, the fine lines around the edges that I'd never bothered to notice before. Thank you for coming, he said. His voice was low and gravelly, the same voice I'd heard at 100 dinners, always brief, always dismissive. But now it carried a different weight. Hesitation, maybe. Regret. Why am I here, James? I asked, skipping the pleasantries. I didn't have the energy for them, and I suspected he didn't either. He waited until the waitress set down his coffee and shuffled away before he answered. He wrapped his hands around the mug like he was trying to warm them, even though the cafe was stifling. I've been watching you, Sophie, he said. For 3 years. I've watched how Eleanor treats you. I've watched how Liam handles you. I've watched you shrink, piece by piece, until you were barely a shadow of the woman you used to be. He paused, took a sip of his coffee, and set the mug down carefully. And I watched you yesterday. The way you stood up to all of them. The way you told them to leave. The way you didn't back down. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. This was a tactic. It had to be. Charm me, disarm me, and then deliver the ultimatum that would drive me back into my gilded cage. I don't understand what you're trying to do, I said flatly. If Eleanor sent you to convince me to come back, Eleanor doesn't know I'm here, he cut in. And she won't find out. That's not why I came. Then why? He exhaled slowly, running a hand over his face. In the harsh fluorescent light of the Bluebird Cafe, he looked every one of his 64 years. Worn down. Beaten by forces I'd never understood. I want to help you, he said. I want to give you something that will help you in your divorce. Something you can use. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and improbable. I leaned back in my booth, crossing my arms. Why would you help me? I'm leaving your son. I'm dismantling your family's precious image. I'm the enemy now. James shook his head slowly. You were never the enemy, Sophie. Eleanor made you the enemy because that's what she does. She needs someone to blame. Someone to control. And Liam. He trailed off, his jaw tightening. Liam is weak. I've known that since he was a boy. But I never said anything. I let Eleanor coddle him, shield him, turn him into a man who couldn't stand on his own 2 feet. And I've been paying for it ever since. I didn't respond. I was too busy trying to process the crack in the facade, the first sign of vulnerability I'd ever seen from James Williams. The man had been a statue for 3 years, silent and unmoved, and now he was sitting in a greasy diner telling me that his son was weak and his wife was a monster. Eleanor is going to fight you hard, he continued. She's going to drag your name through the mud. She's going to use every connection she has to make your life miserable. She's already started, by the way. She called my lawyer yesterday afternoon, trying to get a preliminary injunction on your joint accounts. She's planning to freeze you out before you can even get a retainer. My blood went cold. Of course she was. Eleanor Williams didn't just win, she annihilated. She left no survivors, no loose ends, no evidence that her opposition had ever existed. But I have something that can help you, James said, reaching into his inner jacket pocket. He pulled out a thick manila envelope and slid it across the table toward me. Take it. Don't open it here. Read it when you get home. And then decide what you want to do. I stared at the envelope like it was a live grenade. What is it? His eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something raw and painful in them. Shame. The deep, gnawing shame of a man who'd done something unforgivable and was only now trying to make amends. It's a record, he said quietly. A full financial record of every offshore account Liam has access to. Accounts Eleanor doesn't know about. Accounts he's been funneling money into for years. Money that should have been marital property. Money you're entitled to half of. I felt the air leave my lungs. Offshore accounts. Liam had been hiding assets. During our entire marriage, while I was cooking his mother's brisket and planning her luncheons, he'd been siphoning money into secret accounts. Money I never knew existed. How long? I managed. How long has he been doing this? Since before you got married, James said grimly. He set them up when he started working at the firm. Eleanor encouraged it. She taught him that a smart man always has a contingency plan. That a wife is a liability, not a partner. She taught him to hide things from the people who trusted him. I wanted to be furious. I wanted to scream, to throw the envelope back in his face, to demand to know why he'd let this happen. But all I felt was a hollow, aching sadness. This wasn't just about Liam's betrayal. This was a family built on secrets, on manipulation, on a complete and total lack of trust. I'd been invited into that family as a prop, a warm body to fill a chair at a dinner table, and I'd never been allowed to see the machinery working behind the scenes. Why are you doing this? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. You're betraying your own son. Your own wife. Why would you take my side? James stared into his coffee mug like the answer was swimming in the dark liquid. Because I'm tired, Sophie. I'm tired of pretending. I'm tired of watching Eleanor destroy everyone around her. I'm tired of watching my sons turn into versions of themselves that I don't recognize. Miles is a parasite. Liam is a coward. And I am complicit in all of it. I stood by and let it happen. I let Eleanor dictate every aspect of our lives because it was easier than fighting her. His hands were shaking now. He set the mug down and pressed his palms flat against the table, trying to steady himself. That I lost my first wife, he said abruptly. Before Eleanor. I loved her more than I've ever loved anyone. She was kind and warm and she made me a better man. And then she died. Cancer. It was fast and brutal, and I was left alone with 2 small boys and a grief I didn't know how to process. I waited, not daring to interrupt. Eleanor was the nanny, he continued, his voice hollow. She was young and pretty and she was there. She took care of the boys. She took care of me. And I married her because it was convenient, because I was drowning and she was a life raft. But she was never the right woman. She was never the woman I loved. And I'd been paying for that mistake every single day for 30 years. He looked up at me, and I saw the tears glistening in his eyes. He blinked them back, his pride refusing to let them fall. I see you, Sophie. I see the same thing I saw in my first wife. That spark, that strength, that refusal to be broken. And I watched Eleanor try to snuff it out of you the same way she snuffed it out of me. She didn't succeed with me. I let her take everything because I was too weak to fight. But you're not weak. And I couldn't watch her destroy you the way she destroyed my sons. I couldn't live with myself if I did nothing. I reached across the table and laid my hand over his. It was a small gesture, but it felt monumental. The first time I'd ever touched James Williams with anything resembling warmth. His hand was cold and trembling, and I held it tightly. Thank you, I said. I don't know what to do with this. I don't know how to use it. But thank you for giving it to me. He nodded, withdrawing his hand quickly and wiping his eyes with the back of his sleeve. Keep it safe. Don't let anyone know you have it. Eleanor has connections everywhere. If she finds out about this, she'll destroy the evidence before you can even get a lawyer to look at it. I understand. He slid out of the booth and stood, buttoning his jacket. He paused, looking down at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Pity, maybe. Or something closer to hope. Take care of yourself, Sophie, he said. And when this is all over, when you've won, I hope you'll remember that not everyone in the Williams family was against you. Some of us were just too afraid to show it. He walked out of the cafe without looking back. I sat in the booth for a long time, staring at the manila envelope on the table in front of me. It felt heavier than it should have. Thicker. More dangerous. I paid for my coffee and drove home on autopilot, my mind churning through everything James had told me. Offshore accounts. Hidden assets. Liam's years of deception. The war I was about to wage with his mother, who apparently had more resources and connections than I'd ever imagined. When I got home, I locked every door and drew every curtain. I carried the envelope up to my studio and sat at my desk, staring at it like it might bite me. Finally, I opened it. Inside were bank statements, wire transfer records, and a thick stack of documents that detailed accounts in the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, and a dozen other tax havens I'd only ever read about in thrillers. The numbers made my head spin. Liam had been hiding millions. Millions of dollars that he'd earned during our marriage, that he'd convinced me we were just scraping by on. And he'd done it all with his mother's blessing. I pulled out my phone and dialed Mariana Cruz's office, even though it was Sunday and I knew no one would answer. I left a voicemail, my voice shaking, telling her I needed an emergency consultation. Then I called Vivian Park and told her what had happened. She arrived at my house within an hour, her expression grim. I spread the documents across my desk and watched her go through them, her eyes widening with each new page. This is a goldmine, she said finally. If this is legitimate, you have him. You have all of them. This is spousal fraud, Sophie. It's illegal. And it's going to cost him a lot more than half of everything. I nodded, but my mind was elsewhere. I was thinking about James. About the weight he'd been carrying for decades. About the crack in the facade that had finally broken open. He was a stranger to me, a man I'd never truly known, and yet he'd just handed me the key to my freedom. This doesn't fix everything, I said quietly. This doesn't undo the years of humiliation. The way they made me feel small. The way I let them. No, Vivian agreed. But it gives you power. And power is the only thing the Williams family understands. I looked at the documents again, at the neatly printed numbers and the official bank letterheads. This wasn't just a weapon. This was a declaration. I wasn't going to roll over. I wasn't going to let Eleanor destroy me. I was going to fight, and I was going to win. But as I slid the documents back into the envelope and locked them in my desk drawer, a small, quiet part of me wondered if there was a version of this story where I walked away without fighting at all. A version where I took my half, packed my bags, and disappeared into a life where the Williams family ceased to exist. I pushed the thought away. That wasn't the world I lived in. That wasn't the woman I'd become. That I was Sophie Kim, and I was done running. The morning of my consultation with Mariana Cruz dawned gray and overcast, the kind of California morning that pretended to be moody but couldn't quite commit to rain. I dressed carefully, choosing a tailored blazer that I'd bought years ago for a client presentation and a pair of trousers that made me feel sharp and competent. I was done with linen sundresses and soft fabrics that whispered compliance. Today I needed armor. Vivian had offered to come with me, but I declined. This was something I needed to do alone. The documents from James were tucked into a leather portfolio, their weight reassuring against my hip. I'd spent the previous night reading every single page, committing the numbers to memory, memorizing the names of banks and the dates of transfers. Liam had been hiding money for 4 years. 4 years of watching me stress over grocery bills while he stashed millions in accounts I'd never known existed. Mariana Cruz's office was on the 20th floor of a glass tower downtown, all sleek modern lines and aggressive architecture. The receptionist, a polished young woman with a razor-sharp bob, offered me coffee while I waited. I declined, my stomach too tight for anything but water. When the door opened, Mariana Cruz herself stepped out. She was smaller than I'd expected, barely 5 feet tall, with dark curly hair and a face that seemed designed for courtroom battles. Her eyes were sharp and assessing, missing nothing. She extended a hand, and her grip was firm and cool. Sophie. Come in. Her office was a cathedral of legal warfare. Diplomas and certifications lined the walls, interspersed with photographs of her shaking hands with judges and politicians. She sat behind a massive desk that was immaculately clean except for a single notepad and a sleek laptop. Vivian told me a bit about your situation, she said, gesturing for me to sit. But I want to hear it from you. Tell me everything. I took a breath and began. I told her about the lunch, about Liam's attempt to escape to the office, about the confrontation that had ended with his mother storming out of my house. I told her about the years of passive-aggressive comments, the subtle erosion of my confidence, the way I'd slowly been reduced to a supporting character in my own life. And then I told her about James. The envelope. The offshore accounts. Mariana's expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened. She leaned forward when I mentioned the accounts, her fingers steepled on the desk. Show me. I pulled out the documents and spread them across her desk. She went through them methodically, page by page, her lips moving silently as she absorbed the information. When she finished, she sat back in her chair and let out a low whistle. This is remarkable, Sophie. Do you understand what you have here? I think so. He was hiding marital assets. More than that. She tapped the top document with her manicured nail. These accounts are structured in a way that suggests he was deliberately trying to shield them. Not just from you, but from tax authorities. This isn't just marital fraud. This is potentially criminal. If you want to go that route. I blinked. I didn't come here to send him to prison. I know. Her voice softened just slightly. But having that option gives you leverage. And leverage is what wins divorces. Especially when you're up against someone like Eleanor Williams. I told her about Eleanor's preemptive strike, the call to her lawyer to freeze the joint accounts. Mariana's mouth twisted into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She's predictable. It's almost boring. She thinks she can starve you out, make you desperate enough to accept a settlement that favors them. She's done it before, with Liam's first wife. I froze. Liam's first wife. Mariana's eyes widened. You didn't know? No. I never knew. He never told me. She leaned back in her chair, studying me with something that might have been pity. He was married before you. Brief marriage. Annulled after about 8 months. The woman was a paralegal at his firm. She tried to sue for a decent settlement, but Eleanor crushed her. Made her life a living hell until she agreed to walk away with nothing. I don't even know her name. She disappeared from the legal scene entirely. I felt the floor drop out from under me. Liam had been married before. He'd never mentioned it, not once, in all the years we'd been together. I thought about all the conversations, the long nights sharing our pasts, the promises of complete honesty. They'd all been lies. His first wife's name was Rachel, I said quietly. I found a letter once, tucked inside a book he'd forgotten. I didn't read it, just saw the signature. I thought it was an old girlfriend. I never asked about it because I was too afraid of the answer. Mariana nodded slowly. That fear is exactly what Eleanor counted on. She built a system around making you afraid. Afraid to ask questions. Afraid to push back. Afraid to be anything other than agreeable. It's a classic control tactic. I sat in silence for a long moment, processing. The man I'd married had a whole other marriage I'd never known about. A woman he'd let his mother destroy. And I was supposed to believe I'd been different. Special. The one who'd finally earned his love. I want to move forward, I said finally. I want to file. And I want to use everything you have to make sure I walk away with what I deserve. Mariana's smile was sharp and satisfied. Good. Then let's get started. The next 2 weeks were a blur of legal filings, strategy sessions, and increasingly frantic messages from Liam. He'd started calling from blocked numbers, leaving voicemails that alternated between desperate pleas and barely veiled threats. His mother had escalated her campaign, contacting my clients and hinting that I was unstable, unreliable, not someone they should trust with their business. I lost 2 clients before Mariana drafted a cease and desist letter that made Eleanor back off, at least temporarily. But the damage was done. My professional reputation had taken a hit, and I felt it keenly. The clients who remained were cautious, watching me like I might explode at any moment. Vivian became my anchor during those weeks. She showed up at my house with takeout and wine, forcing me to eat and sleep and take care of myself. She talked me through the legal jargon, translating the dense language of the filings into something I could understand. She held my hand when I cried, which happened more often than I wanted to admit. But she also pushed me. She didn't let me wallow or retreat into the self-blame I'd perfected over 3 years of marriage. Every time I started to apologize for being difficult, for causing trouble, for appending the life I'd built, she cut me off. Stop it, she'd say firmly. You're not the villain here. You're the one who finally stood up for yourself. That's not something you apologize for. I was starting to believe her. On a Thursday afternoon, nearly 3 weeks after the confrontation at my house, I got a text from an unknown number. It was a photo. A photo of me leaving Mariana's office, my portfolio tucked under my arm, my face clearly visible. The caption read, "You think you're so clever. You're not." I recognized the number. It was one of Eleanor's burner phones. She'd been following me. Having me followed. I felt a cold rage settle in my chest, sharp and clarifying. She wasn't just trying to win the divorce. She was trying to scare me. Intimidate me into backing down. I called Mariana immediately and told her about the text. Her voice was calm, controlled, but I could hear the steel underneath. Save the message. Don't delete it. This is harassment. It's another weapon in our arsenal. What do I do about it? What do I do about her? Nothing. You do nothing. You let her bury herself. Every time she tries to intimidate you, she gives us more evidence of her behavior. We're building a case, Sophie. Not just against Liam. Against all of them. The whole rotten system. The next day, Liam showed up at my door. I heard the knock at 7 in the evening, just as I was settling in with a glass of wine and a stack of client briefs. I looked through the peephole and my heart seized. He was standing there in his expensive overcoat, his hair disheveled, his face gaunt and pale. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. I considered not answering. I could pretend I wasn't home, let him stand out in the cold until he gave up. But I knew him well enough to know that wouldn't work. He'd wait. He'd knock and knock and knock until the neighbors complained, and then he'd find another way to get to me. I opened the door. Sophie. His voice cracked on my name. He reached for me, and I stepped back. Don't touch me. What are you doing here? I had to see you. I had to talk to you, face to face. His eyes were red-rimmed, desperate. Please. Just give me 5 minutes. I crossed my arms and waited. He took a breath, running his hands through his hair in that nervous gesture I used to find endearing. Everything is falling apart, he said. My mother is out of control. She's been calling my partners, trying to get them to pressure me into fighting you. She's threatening to cut me off if I don't do what she says. And my father won't speak to me. He just sits in his study and stares at the wall. I'm sorry to hear that, I said flatly. But it's not my problem. Sophie, please. He stepped forward, and I stepped back again. This is insane. We can fix this. We can work this out. You don't have to do this. I don't have to do what stand up for myself, demand what I'm owed after years of being treated like a servant. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Liam, you've been hiding assets from me for years. You had a whole other marriage I never knew about. You lied to me about everything. His face went white. How do you know about that? I know a lot of things, Liam. I know about the Cayman accounts. I know about the Swiss accounts. I know about your mother's attempts to freeze my accounts before I could even get a lawyer. I know everything. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. Who told you? That doesn't matter. What matters is that I'm not playing your family's games anymore. I'm not going to let you and your mother destroy me the way you destroyed Rachel. I'm not going to be another casualty of the Williams family's ego. Rachel. He said her name like it was a ghost, something he hadn't thought about in years. You don't understand what happened with Rachel. Then explain it to me. Tell me why you let your mother destroy a woman you'd promised to love and cherish. Tell me why you didn't fight for her. Tell me why you thought I'd be any different. He was crying now, tears streaming down his face. It was the first time I'd ever seen Liam Williams truly cry. Real tears, not the crocodile ones he deployed to get out of uncomfortable situations. I was young, he said, his voice breaking. I was stupid. My mother convinced me that Rachel was after my money. That she didn't really love me. And I believed her because I was too weak to see the truth. And what was the truth? He closed his eyes. The truth was that she loved me. She really loved me. And I destroyed her because I was too afraid of my mother to stand up for her. I've regretted it every single day since. Then why did you do it again? I asked, my voice cold. Why did you marry me if you knew you couldn't protect me from her? Because I thought I could. I thought I was stronger. I thought. He broke off, shaking his head. I thought if I just loved you enough, it would be different. But I was wrong. I was wrong about everything. I looked at this man, this broken, desperate man, and I felt nothing. Not pity, not love, not anger. Just a vast, empty indifference. To go home, Liam. Go deal with your mother. Go figure out who you want to be. But don't come back here. Don't call. Don't text. Let the lawyers handle it from here. Sophie, go. He stood there for a long moment, his eyes pleading. Then he turned and walked away, his shoulders hunched, his steps slow. I watched him get into his car and drive off, the taillights disappearing around the corner. I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding. I'd done it. I'd stood my ground. I'd refused to be manipulated. And for the first time in 3 years, I felt like I was in control of my own life. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. The next morning, Eleanor struck back. I woke to a flurry of notifications on my phone. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Messages from friends and acquaintances asking if I was okay. I opened the first one and felt my blood run cold. It was a post from Eleanor's social media account. A carefully crafted statement that painted me as a gold-digging shrew who'd married Liam for his money and was now trying to destroy his life. She'd included screenshots of old text messages, taken out of context, making me look unreasonable and demanding. She'd even photoshopped a picture of me at a party, making me look drunk and disheveled. The comments were brutal. Old friends I'd trusted, acquaintances I'd barely known, strangers from the internet. All of them piling on, calling me every name imaginable. The post had gone viral within hours. Mariana had been sharing it with her legal team, the amount of engagement escalating so quickly that my phone's notifications were a constant vibrating hum of harassment. I called Mariana immediately. She answered on the first ring. I see it, she said. I'm already drafting a defamation suit. This is actionable, Sophie. This is going to cost her. She's trying to destroy me, I said, my voice shaking. She's trying to destroy my business. I've already had clients cancel. I can't afford to lose any more. Hold on, she said firmly. I want you to listen to me. Eleanor is panicking. She's throwing everything she has at you because she knows she's losing. The more she attacks you publicly, the more ammunition we have. Let her dig her own grave. I took a breath, trying to calm my racing heart. What do I do? For now, nothing. You go dark on social media. Don't engage, don't respond, don't defend yourself. Let her look like the bully she is. I'll handle the rest. I followed her instructions, deactivating my accounts and disappearing from the public eye. The silence was strange at first. I was so used to the constant hum of notifications, the endless scroll, the performative engagement. But slowly, I started to appreciate it. The quiet. The peace. The absence of Eleanor's voice in my head. A week later, James called again. This time, his voice was different. Harder. More determined. Sophie, I need to tell you something. What is it? I'm leaving Eleanor. I've already moved out. I'm filing for divorce. I sat down hard on my bed. James, you can't. She'll destroy you. She'll take everything. He laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. She can't take what I don't have. I've already transferred my assets to a trust for the boys. She'll get what she's owed, but it won't be enough to destroy me. And I have something she doesn't have. What's that? A conscience. For the first time in 30 years, I have a conscience. And I'm going to use it. He told me about the evidence he'd gathered over the years. Records of Eleanor's extortion. Evidence of her attempts to manipulate and control people. A paper trail of a woman who'd been destroying lives for decades. I'm going to come forward publicly, he said. I'm going to testify about everything I know. About the accounts. About the harassment. About Rachel. I felt my throat tighten. James, you don't have to do this. You've already done enough. You gave me the documents. You helped me. I didn't do it for you, he said quietly. I did it for me. I did it because I need to make things right before I die. I've spent 30 years watching my wife destroy people. I've spent 30 years pretending I didn't see. And now I'm done pretending. He hung up before I could respond, and I sat there in the quiet, stunned. The world was shifting. The ground was changing beneath my feet. And suddenly, I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was part of something bigger, something that was going to bring the entire Williams empire crashing down. The next few days were chaos. James's announcement was a bomb. Eleanor went ballistic, publicly accusing him of dementia, of being manipulated, of betraying his family. But the evidence he'd released was ironclad. The media picked it up, running stories about the Williams family's corruption, their secret accounts, their systematic destruction of anyone who got in their way. Liam vanished. I didn't hear from him at all. His partners at the firm distanced themselves. His friends stopped returning his calls. The golden boy of the Williams dynasty was suddenly a pariah, and he didn't have the spine to fight back. On a Tuesday morning, I got a call from Mariana. "It's over, Sophie. We won." Eleanor agreed to a settlement. Full split of all marital assets, including the hidden accounts. Plus damages for harassment and defamation. Plus a public apology. I was too stunned to speak. She agreed to all of that. She didn't have a choice. James's testimony would have ruined her. She took the deal because it was the only way to keep any shred of her reputation intact. "You got everything you asked for." I set down the phone and walked to my window. The sun was shining, the sky clear and blue. I looked out at the neighborhood, the manicured lawns, the quiet streets. My house. My life. Mine. That I thought about the journey I'd taken. The woman I'd been 3 years ago, the woman who'd believed that love meant sacrifice, that being a good wife meant losing yourself in someone else's expectations. I thought about the woman I'd become, standing in the ruins of her marriage, strong and whole and free. And I thought about what came next. The future I'd been given. The second chance I'd never asked for but had fought to claim. That I grabbed my keys and drove to the beach. I kicked off my shoes and walked through the sand to the water's edge. The waves lapped at my feet, cool and refreshing. I stood there for a long time, just breathing, just being. When I turned to leave, I saw a figure in the distance. A woman, sitting on a blanket, watching the sunset. I walked toward her, and as I got closer, I recognized her face. It was Rachel. Liam's first wife. The woman he'd abandoned. The woman who'd disappeared. She looked up as I approached, and her eyes widened in recognition. "You're Sophie," she said softly. "I've been following the news. I wanted to see you." "Why?" I asked, sitting down beside her. "Why would you want to see me?" She smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "Because I know what it's like. I know what you went through. And I wanted to tell you that it gets better. It really does." I sat with her on the sand, watching the sun dip below the horizon. 2 women who'd been victims of the same family. 2 women who'd survived. 2 women who'd found their way back to themselves. "This isn't the end," Rachel said quietly. "It's the beginning." I nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle into my bones. The Williams family was in ruins. Eleanor was defeated. Liam was gone. And I was standing on the brink of a future that was entirely my own. It was the beginning. And I was ready for whatever came next. The settlement papers arrived on a Friday afternoon, delivered by courier in a thick manila envelope that felt heavier than it should have. I signed them in my studio, the pen gliding across the paper like a final goodbye. Mariana had reviewed everything twice, triple-checking every clause, every number, every contingency. The money was mine. The house was mine. The freedom was mine. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt hollow. The battle was over, but the war had left scars I was only beginning to understand. I'd spent so long fighting that I'd forgotten how to stop. The silence in my house was deafening, the absence of conflict almost unsettling. I found myself checking my phone obsessively, waiting for the next attack, the next betrayal. But nothing came. Eleanor had gone quiet. Liam had vanished entirely. James had retreated to a small apartment across town, his divorce from Eleanor proceeding quietly and without fanfare. I needed to get out. The house felt like a museum of my former life, every room holding memories I wanted to burn. I packed a bag and drove north, leaving the city behind for the rugged coastline of Big Sur. The drive was long and winding, the Pacific glittering on my left like a promise. I didn't have a destination in mind, just the road and the open sky. That I ended up at a small inn perched on a cliff, the kind of place that looked like it belonged in a postcard. The rooms were rustic but comfortable, with windows that faced the ocean and beds that smelled like lavender. I checked in under a fake name, not wanting anyone to find me. Not that anyone was looking. The first day, I did nothing. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, letting my mind drift. I thought about Liam, about the way he'd looked at me in the beginning, like I was the most precious thing in the world. I thought about how that look had faded, replaced by indifference and obligation. I thought about Eleanor, about the years of subtle cruelty I'd accepted as normal. I thought about James, about the quiet desperation that had driven him to betray his own family. And I thought about myself. The woman I'd been. The woman I was becoming. On the second day, I walked along the beach. The sand was cold and damp, the waves crashing against the shore with a rhythm that felt ancient and eternal. I walked for hours, letting the salt air fill my lungs, letting the sound of the water drown out the noise in my head. That I found a tide pool, tucked between two rocks, teeming with life. Tiny crabs scuttled across the bottom. Anemones waved their tentacles in the gentle current. A starfish clung to the side of a rock, its colors vivid and bright. I knelt down and watched, mesmerized by the miniature world that existed in that small, hidden place. It struck me then, the fragility of it. How easily that tide pool could be destroyed. A wave too strong, a rock too heavy, a careless footstep. And yet, it persisted. Life found a way to survive, even in the most precarious circumstances. That I thought about Rachel. About the woman who'd been destroyed by the same family, the same cruelty. I'd reached out to her after our meeting on the beach, exchanging numbers and making vague promises to stay in touch. But I hadn't followed up. I'd been too consumed with my own battle, my own survival. I pulled out my phone and sent her a text. I'm in Big Sur. Thinking about you. Want to come up for a few days? My treat. Her reply came within minutes. I'd love that. Give me the address. Rachel arrived the next evening, her car packed with bags and a bottle of wine she'd brought as a peace offering. She looked different than she had on the beach. More relaxed, more alive. The shadows under her eyes had faded, and there was a lightness in her step that hadn't been there before. Thank you for this, she said, setting her bags down in the corner of my room. I needed to get away. My life has been complicated lately. Tell me about it, I said, pouring us both glasses of wine. I feel like we've been living parallel lives. She laughed, a soft, rueful sound. More like parallel nightmares. But we survived. That counts for something. We sat on the balcony, watching the sun sink into the ocean, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The wine was good, smooth and dry, and it loosened something in both of us. We talked for hours, sharing stories that we'd never told anyone else. The small cruelties, the quiet humiliations, the moments we'd looked in the mirror and not recognized ourselves. I was so young when I married Liam, Rachel said, her voice distant. 22. I thought I knew everything. I thought love was enough. I didn't understand that I was marrying into a system. A machine. And the machine was designed to crush anyone who didn't fit. I nodded, understanding more than I wanted to. Eleanor made me feel like I was always one wrong move away from being discarded. Like I had to earn my place every single day. That's exactly it. Rachel set down her glass and turned to face me. She creates this dynamic where you're always striving, always trying to prove yourself. And you never can. Because the goalpost keeps moving. You'll never be good enough, and that's the point. She needs you to feel insecure so she can control you. I thought about all the times I'd apologized for things that weren't my fault. All the times I'd bitten my tongue, swallowed my pride, accepted the blame for things I hadn't done. All the times I'd convinced myself that I was the problem, that if I just tried harder, Everything would be okay. Did you ever feel like you were losing yourself? I asked quietly. Like there was a version of you that existed before the marriage, and you couldn't find her anymore. Rachel was silent for a long moment. I thought I'd lost her forever, she said finally. I thought the person I was before Liam was gone, destroyed, never coming back. And then one day, I realized she'd been there the whole time. She was just buried so deep I couldn't see her. How did you find her? She smiled, and there was a wisdom in her eyes that hadn't been there before. I stopped trying to be who everyone else wanted me to be. I stopped apologizing for existing. I started doing things that made me happy, even if they seemed small and insignificant. I painted. I wrote. I went for long walks and didn't bring my phone. I relearned how to be alone without being lonely. I took her words in, letting them settle into the parts of me that still felt raw and broken. I'd been so focused on winning the battle that I'd forgotten to think about what came after. What victory looked like. What healing looked like. The next morning, I woke early and walked down to the beach alone. The tide was out, revealing stretches of sand that had been hidden the day before. I walked farther than I'd ever gone, past the tide pools, past the rocky outcroppings, until I found a small cove that felt like my own secret place that I sat on a rock and watched the waves, letting my mind wander. I thought about my career, about the clients I'd lost and the projects I'd abandoned. I thought about my studio, the sketches and half-finished designs waiting for me. I thought about the woman I wanted to become, the life I wanted to build. And I made a decision. I was going to take a year. A year to heal, to rebuild, to figure out who I was without the Williams family shadow hanging over me. A year to paint and write and explore. A year to find the woman I'd been before I'd married Liam, and to discover the woman I was becoming. That I went back to the inn and told Rachel my plan. She listened, her eyes bright and encouraging. That sounds perfect, she said. Can I come with you part of the way? At least I've been wanting to travel, to see places I've never seen. I think we both need an adventure. I laughed, the first real laugh I'd let out in months. Let's do it. Let's get out of here and see where the road takes us. We spent the next week planning. We mapped out a route that would take us up the coast, through Oregon and Washington, all the way to Vancouver. We'd stay in cheap motels and eat at diners and do all the things we'd never allowed ourselves to do when we were married to men who'd expected us to be perfect. That the morning we left, I stood on the balcony of my room and looked out at the ocean one last time. The sun was rising, golden and bright, painting the water in shades of amber and rose. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the salt air, and I felt something shift inside me. A weight lifting. A door opening. Ready, Rachel called from the car. That I grabbed my bag and ran down the stairs, my heart light and my steps quick. We pulled out of the parking lot and headed north, the ocean on our left, the mountains on our right, the open road stretching out before us like a promise. For the first time in years, I didn't know where I was going. And for the first time in years, that was exactly where I wanted to be. The trip was everything I'd hoped for. We drove for hours each day, taking detours to explore small towns and hidden beaches. We hiked through redwood forests, the trees so tall they seemed to touch the sky. We ate clam chowder from food trucks and bought cheap souvenirs from roadside stands. We talked about everything and nothing, sharing the kind of deep, honest conversations that only happen when you're traveling with someone who understands you completely. Rachel told me about her life after the annulment. The years of therapy, the slow process of rebuilding her sense of self. The career she'd started, working as a counselor for women in abusive relationships. The satisfaction she found in helping others navigate the same darkness she'd escaped. I thought about revenge for a long time, she admitted one night, sitting by a campfire in a state park in Oregon. I wanted to hurt them the way they'd hurt me. I wanted to expose everything. But I realized that revenge wouldn't heal me. It would just keep me trapped in the same cycle of anger and pain. What changed? I asked as she poked at the fire with a stick, watching the sparks fly up into the darkness. I realized that the best revenge was living well. Building a life that they couldn't touch. Being happy in a way that they'd never understand. They wanted to destroy me, and I refused to let them. That's the only victory that matters. I thought about Eleanor, about the rage that had driven her to attack me publicly. She was still out there, still angry, still trying to control the narrative. And I realized that I didn't care. Her opinion didn't matter. Her judgment didn't matter. She was a ghost from a past I was leaving behind. We crossed into Washington a week later, the landscape shifting from coastal cliffs to lush, green forests. The air was cooler here, fresher, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. We stopped in a small town called Port Townsend, a charming place with Victorian buildings and a vibrant art scene. Rachel insisted we spend a few days there, exploring the galleries and studios that lined the main street that I fell in love with the place immediately. There was something about the creative energy, the sense of possibility, that spoke to something deep inside me. I spent hours in the local art supply store, buying materials I didn't need but couldn't resist. Brushes and paints and sketchbooks, all the tools I'd neglected for years. On our second day in Port Townsend, I found a small studio space for rent. It was above a bookstore, with large windows that faced the water and a wooden floor that creaked in all the right places. The rent was cheap, the landlord was friendly, and the space felt like it was waiting for me. That I signed the lease the next day. Rachel was thrilled. "This is perfect for you. You can work here, live here, build your life here. It's exactly what you need." I didn't tell her that I was scared. That the thought of building a new life from scratch was terrifying. That I'd spent so long being defined by my marriage that I wasn't sure I knew how to exist on my own. But I felt it, the fear, pressing against the edges of my excitement like a cold draft. The fear didn't stop me. I'd learned that fear was a liar, a ghost that could only hold power over you if you let it. I'd faced down Eleanor Williams. I'd survived 3 years of quiet cruelty and emerged stronger. I could handle a little uncertainty. That I moved into the studio the following week. Rachel helped me unpack, arranging my few possessions into a space that felt like mine. My sketches went up on the walls. My paints and brushes found homes on the shelves. My bed, a simple futon, was tucked into a corner, covered in a soft quilt I'd bought from a local artisan. The first night in my new home, I sat by the window and watched the sunset over the water. The sky was a riot of colors, orange and pink and purple, bleeding into the darkening blue. I felt a peace I hadn't felt in years. A sense of belonging, of being exactly where I was supposed to be. I picked up my sketchbook and started to draw. A woman standing at the edge of a cliff, her face lifted toward the sun. The same figure I'd drawn 1,000 times, in 1,000 different ways. But this time, she was different. She wasn't looking back at the abyss. She was looking forward. She was ready to leap. I worked late into the night, losing myself in the creative flow. When I finally looked up, the moon was high and the studio was quiet. I set down my pencil and felt a smile spread across my face. For the first time in years, I was doing what I loved. I was creating. I was alive. The weeks that followed were a blur of work and discovery. I started taking on new clients, small projects that didn't require the high-pressure stakes of my former career. I painted for myself, filling canvas after canvas with images of the coast, the forests, the woman on the cliff. I wrote, journaling about my journey, documenting the moments that had shaped me. Rachel stayed for a few weeks before heading back to her own life. We promised to stay in touch, to visit each other, to continue the friendship that had become so essential to both of us. She hugged me goodbye at the bus station, her eyes bright with tears. "You're going to be okay," she said. "You're already more than okay. You're incredible." I hugged her back, not trusting myself to speak. Then I watched her bus pull away, disappearing around a corner, and I walked back to my studio with a heart full of gratitude. The months passed, and I settled into a rhythm. Mornings were for client work, afternoons for painting, evenings for reading and writing and staring at the water. I made friends in the community, other artists and creatives who welcomed me without judgment. I joined a local gallery and started showing my work, the first time I'd put my art out into the world in years. The reception was overwhelming. People responded to the images, to the emotion I'd poured into them. I sold several pieces and got commissions for more. The money wasn't a fortune, but it was enough. Enough to live on, enough to feel independent, enough to remind me that I didn't need anyone else to define my worth. But there were hard days too. Days when the weight of the past pressed down on me, when the memories felt too heavy to carry. Nights when I woke up gasping, convinced that Eleanor's voice was echoing in the darkness, that Liam's indifference was still a presence in the room, that I started seeing a therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Alvarez, who helped me untangle the knots in my mind. She taught me techniques for managing the anxiety, for grounding myself when the panic threatened to overwhelm me. She helped me understand the patterns I'd fallen into, the ways I'd been conditioned to accept less than I deserved. "You spent years believing that your value was tied to how well you served others," she said one session. "That's not a failure on your part. That's the result of being in an environment that systematically undermined your sense of self. The fact that you got out, that you're building a new life, that's a testament to your strength." I cried in her office that day. Not sad tears, but tears of relief. Tears of release. Tears that washed away the last remnants of the person I'd been and made room for the person I was becoming. I also found a new perspective on James. We talked occasionally, brief phone calls where he checked in on my progress. He was navigating his own healing, his own journey toward wholeness. His divorce from Eleanor was final, and he'd moved to a small town in the mountains, far from the chaos of his former life. He'd started a foundation, funding programs for women leaving abusive relationships, using his money and influence to make amends for the years of silence. That "I can't undo what I did," he told me once. "I can't go back and protect Rachel. I can't go back and protect you. But I can do better now. I can be better now." I told him that I forgave him. I didn't know if he believed me, but I meant it. Forgiveness wasn't about excusing his actions. It was about freeing myself from the weight of resentment. Holding on to anger was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. I'd done enough of that in my marriage. I wasn't going to do it anymore. By the time autumn arrived, I felt like a different person. The scars were still there, but they'd faded, become part of the texture of my life rather than the defining features. I was working, creating, building a community. I had friends and purpose and a future that felt bright and open. I started writing again, not just for myself but for others. I launched a blog, sharing my story, offering advice to women who were going through what I'd experienced. The response was overwhelming, emails pouring in from all over the world. Women who'd been through similar struggles, who'd been broken and silenced and told they didn't matter. Women who were finding their way back to themselves, that it wasn't the life I'd imagined when I married Liam. It was better. It was real. It was mine. One evening in October, I got a text from an unknown number. My heart seized, old habits flaring to life. But when I opened it, I saw a photo of a small gallery opening, a crowd of people gathered around a painting that looked achingly familiar. The caption read, "Saw your work in a gallery in Seattle. It made me think of you. I'm proud of you, Sophie." Liam. I stared at the screen for a long time. The message was simple, almost too simple. But there was something in it that felt genuine. A small gesture, an olive branch, a sign that he'd seen something in my success that had touched him. That I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The act of sending the message, of reaching out, was enough. It told me that he'd changed, at least a little. That the experience of losing everything had taught him something. Whether that lesson would stick was his problem, not mine. I deleted the message and went back to my painting. The woman on the cliff was almost finished. She was standing at the edge, her arms spread wide, her face lifted toward the sun. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't looking back. She was ready to leap. And for the first time in my life, I understood exactly what that leap meant. It wasn't about falling. It was about flying. The invitation arrived in a cream-colored envelope with my name handwritten in elegant script. I stared at it for a long moment, turning it over in my hands, feeling the weight of the thick paper. It was addressed to my studio in Port Townsend, forwarded from my old house. The return address was a gallery in San Francisco. The sender was Vivian Park. I opened it carefully, almost ceremoniously, and pulled out the card inside. It was an invitation to an exhibition opening, a group show featuring women artists who'd overcome significant adversity. My work was included. They wanted me to attend. They wanted me to speak. That I set the invitation down and walked to the window. The Puget Sound stretched out before me, gray and calm under the overcast sky. A year had passed since I'd left my marriage. A year since I'd stood in my kitchen and told Eleanor Williams that I was done being her puppet. A year of healing, of rebuilding, of becoming someone I barely recognized. I'd been keeping in touch with Vivian sporadically. She'd become something of a mentor, guiding me through the aftermath of the divorce, helping me navigate the emotional and financial fallout. She'd also become a friend, one of the few people who'd seen me at my lowest and hadn't flinched. That I called her that evening, my phone pressed to my ear as I watched the lights of the ferry blink across the dark water. I got the invitation, I said. What's this about? The gallery reached out to me, she explained. They've been following your work. They read your blog. They want to feature you in this show. I told them you might be interested. I laughed, a nervous, uncertain sound. I don't know if I'm ready for that. A show in San Francisco, that's a big deal. It is a big deal. And you deserve it. Your work is extraordinary, Sophie. You've been hiding in that studio, painting for yourself, and that's beautiful. But it's time to share it with the world. I was quiet for a long moment. The old fears were there, the voices that told me I wasn't good enough, that I was overreaching, that I'd be humiliated. But they were quieter now. Fainter. Like memories of a bad dream that faded in the light of morning. Okay, I said finally. I'll do it. But you're coming with me. She laughed, warm and genuine. I wouldn't miss it for the world. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. I selected the pieces I wanted to show, 10 paintings that traced my journey from the depths of my marriage to the heights of my freedom. The woman on the cliff was there, in various forms, each one showing a different stage of her transformation. The gallery was thrilled. They sent a photographer to document my studio, and the resulting images made me look like an artist I'd never imagined I could be. The night before the opening, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my futon, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with possibilities and fears. What if no one came? What if they came and hated the work? What if I froze during my speech and made a fool of myself? I got up and made tea, wrapping my hands around the warm mug as I walked to the window. The sound was dark, the water invisible except for the occasional glint of light from a passing boat. I thought about the woman in my paintings, the one who'd stood at the edge of the cliff and chosen to leap. I'd painted her 100 times, in 100 different ways. And each time, she'd been braver than I was. I had to be brave now. Vivian picked me up the next morning in a sleek rental car, looking every inch the sophisticated professional she'd become. She hugged me tightly, her eyes bright with excitement. You look amazing, she said, pulling back to appraise me. Nervous, terrified, I admitted. Good. That means you care. That's what makes you an artist. The drive to San Francisco was long, but Vivian kept me distracted with stories and jokes and gentle encouragement. By the time we arrived at the gallery, I'd almost forgotten to be anxious. Almost. The space was breathtaking. White walls, high ceilings, soft lighting that made the paintings glow. My work was arranged in a series, telling a story that was both deeply personal and universally relatable. I walked through the gallery, my heels clicking on the polished floor, and I felt a swell of emotion that caught me off guard. This was my life. My story. My art. And it was beautiful. The opening was scheduled for 7 o'clock. By 6:30, the gallery was already filling up. Vivian introduced me to a dozen people whose names I immediately forgot, their faces a blur of smiles and congratulations. I smiled and nodded and tried to remember to breathe. And then it was time. I stood at the podium, my notes clutched in trembling hands, and I looked out at the sea of faces. Vivian was front and center, her expression one of pure, unbridled support. I saw Rachel in the crowd, her eyes shining with tears. And in the back, half hidden in the shadows, I saw a figure I recognized. James. He'd come. He'd driven all the way from his mountain retreat to be here that I took a deep breath and began to speak that good evening. My name is Sophie Kim, and I'm an artist. But that's not how I used to identify myself. For years, I was someone's wife. Someone's daughter-in-law. Someone's project. I was defined by the people around me, by their expectations, by their demands. And somewhere along the way, I forgot who I was. The room was silent, every eye on me. I could feel the weight of their attention, and instead of crushing me, it buoyed me that I spent 3 years in a marriage that slowly eroded my sense of self. I was surrounded by people who told me I wasn't enough, who made me feel like I had to constantly prove my worth. And I believed them. I believed them because I'd been taught that love meant sacrifice, that being a good wife meant losing yourself in someone else's expectations. I paused, letting the words settle. I could see the recognition in some of the faces, the shared understanding of a story that was all too common. Leaving that marriage was the hardest thing I've ever done. But it was also the most important. Because in leaving, I found myself. I found my voice. I found my art. I found a life that was entirely my own. I gestured to the paintings behind me, the series that told my story. These paintings are my journey. They're the woman I was, the woman I became, and the woman I'm still becoming. They're a reminder that we are not defined by the people who try to break us. We are defined by how we rise. The applause was deafening. I stood at the podium, blinking back tears, and I felt a sense of completion I'd never experienced before. I'd told my story. I'd shared my truth. And the world had received it with open arms. Afterward, the crowd swarmed me. People wanted to talk, to shake my hand, to buy my work. I sold 4 paintings that night, the woman on the cliff finding new homes with people who'd connected with her journey. I signed books and took photos and answered questions, my exhaustion forgotten in the rush of connection that when the crowd finally thinned, I saw James waiting for me in the corner. He looked older than I remembered, his face lined with regret and hard-won wisdom. But his eyes were bright, and there was a smile on his lips. "You were magnificent," he said, pulling me into a brief, gentle hug. "I'm so proud of you, Sophie." "Thank you for coming," I said, my voice thick. "It means a lot. I wouldn't have missed it." He stepped back, his hands in his pockets. "I've been following your blog. Reading your words. You've helped so many people. More than you know." I shook my head. "I just told my story. The rest was them." "That's the thing about stories," he said quietly. "They have a power of their own. Once you tell them, they take on a life beyond you. They heal people you'll never meet." I thought about the emails I'd received, the women who'd reached out to thank me for giving voice to their own experiences. James was right. My story had become something bigger than me. Rachel found me a few minutes later, her eyes still red from crying. She hugged me fiercely, her arms wrapped tight around my shoulders. "That you did it," she whispered. "You really did it." "We did it," I corrected. "I couldn't have done this without you." She pulled back, shaking her head. "This was all you, Sophie. You're the one who stood up. You're the one who fought. You're the one who built something beautiful out of the ruins." I looked at her, this woman who'd been through so much and come out the other side. We were both survivors, both transformed by our experiences. And we'd found each other, 2 women who'd been broken by the same family and were now building something new. The night wound down slowly. The gallery closed at 11, but a group of us went out for drinks, celebrating the success of the opening. I laughed and talked and let myself be carried by the joy of the moment. When I finally crawled into my hotel bed at 2 in the morning, I was exhausted and exhilarated and utterly at peace. The next day, I woke to a text from an unknown number. My heart clenched, old reflexes firing. But when I opened it, I saw a photo of my painting, The Woman on the Cliff, hanging in someone's living room. The caption read, "I bought it last night. It's going to hang in my office. Every time I look at it, I'll remember that I can fly too. Thank you." A grateful stranger. I smiled and set down my phone. The world was full of strangers who'd become allies. Full of people who'd found hope in my story. Full of women who were learning to fly. I spent the next few days in San Francisco, visiting galleries and meeting artists, soaking up the creative energy of the city. Vivian left to return to her practice, but Rachel stayed, and we explored together like we had on our road trip. We ate dim sum in Chinatown and walked across the Golden Gate Bridge and watched the sea lions at Pier 39. We talked about our futures, our plans, the lives we were building. Rachel had started her own practice, a small counseling center for women leaving abusive relationships. She was passionate about her work, driven by her own experiences to help others navigate the same darkness. "It's not easy," she admitted one afternoon, sitting on a bench overlooking the bay. "Some days I hear stories that break my heart. But I remember what it felt like to be alone, to have no one who understood. And I know that I'm making a difference." "You are," I said. "You're changing lives. So are you." She turned to face me, her expression serious. "Your art, your blog, your story. You're reaching people in ways you can't even imagine. Don't ever doubt that." I nodded, the words settling into my chest. I didn't doubt it anymore. I'd seen the proof, in the emails and the comments and the messages from strangers who'd found hope in my work. We parted ways at the airport, hugging tightly and promising to stay in touch. Rachel flew back to her practice. I flew back to Port Townsend, back to my studio, back to the life I'd built from the ground up. The ferry ride home was quiet, the water dark and still. I sat on the deck, watching the lights of my town approach, and I felt a profound sense of gratitude. For the journey I'd taken. For the people who'd helped me along the way. For the woman I'd become. When I got back to my studio, I found a letter taped to my door. It was from James, a handwritten note on simple paper. I unfolded it and read. "Sophie, I wanted to tell you something I should have said years ago. You are not what Eleanor said you were. You are not what Liam made you feel. You are strong and brilliant and capable of anything. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. I'm sorry I didn't say it sooner. But I'm saying it now. You deserve everything good that comes your way. With love, James." I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. The words were simple, but they meant everything. They were a balm for wounds I'd carried for years, a validation of the woman I'd become. I tucked the letter into a drawer with my most precious possessions and walked to my window. The sound was calm, the moon reflecting off the water like a silver path. I thought about the year that had passed, the battles I'd fought, the victories I'd won. I thought about the woman I'd been and the woman I was becoming. And I thought about the future. The endless possibilities that stretched out before me like the open sea. I'd spent so long being defined by others. By my marriage, by my in-laws, by the expectations of a family that had never truly seen me. But that was over. I was free. I was whole. I was mine. I walked to my easel and picked up my brush. The canvas was blank, white and waiting. I dipped the brush in paint and made the first stroke, a line of vibrant blue that cut across the empty space like a promise. This was the beginning. Not of a story, but of a life. A life I would write myself, stroke by stroke, day by day. The woman on the cliff had leaped. And she was still flying. The months that followed were a steady rhythm of work and growth. My blog had grown into a platform, reaching hundreds of thousands of readers. I started speaking at events, sharing my story with audiences across the country. I published a collection of my paintings, a beautiful coffee table book that sold out within weeks of its release. The money was good, more than I'd ever made in my old career. But the fulfillment was better. I was doing work that mattered, work that connected me to people I'd never meet, work that made a difference in the world. I also started a foundation, a small nonprofit that provided grants to women artists who'd survived abuse. It was my way of paying it forward, of using my success to lift others up. The first grant went to a young woman in Portland, a painter who'd escaped a violent marriage and was struggling to rebuild her career. Her work was extraordinary, raw and emotional, and I felt a surge of pride when I saw it hanging in a gallery a year later. My relationship with my family also healed. My mother had always been distant, her love conditional on my compliance. But when she saw what I'd built, she reached out, tentative and uncertain. We talked for hours, mending fences that had been broken for years. She told me she was proud of me, and for the first time, I believed her. I even heard from Liam. Not directly, but through mutual friends. He'd left the firm, moved to a small town in the Midwest, started over. He was working as a counselor, helping men who'd been in abusive relationships understand the patterns of control and manipulation. He'd found a purpose, a way to make amends for the damage he'd caused. I didn't need to see him. I didn't need closure. I'd already found it, in the life I'd built, the woman I'd become. But I was grateful that he'd changed, that he'd broken the cycle he'd inherited from his mother. It didn't undo what he'd done. But it made the world a little bit better. Eleanor was the only one who didn't find redemption. She'd retreated to her mansion, isolated and bitter, her influence crumbling around her. James had taken everything in the divorce, leaving her with just enough to live on but not enough to maintain her empire. She was a ghost in her own life, a woman who'd ruled through fear and control and had lost everything when her subjects finally rebelled. I didn't feel sorry for her. I didn't feel anything at all. She was a lesson, a reminder of what happened when you let power corrupt your humanity. And I'd learned that lesson well. On a spring morning, a year and a half after the gallery opening, I stood in my studio and looked at my latest painting. It was different from the woman on the cliff. This was a portrait of a woman standing in a garden, surrounded by flowers, her face lifted toward the sun. She wasn't standing on the edge of anything. She was simply living, grounded and present and at peace. I'd painted myself without even realizing it. I hung the painting in my living room, where I could see it every day. It was a reminder of how far I'd come. A testament to the healing I'd found. A celebration of the life I'd built. That evening, I sat on my balcony and watched the sunset over the Sound. The sky was a symphony of colors, gold and pink and purple, bleeding into the darkening blue. I thought about the journey I'd taken, the battles I'd fought, the victories I'd won. I thought about the woman I'd been and the woman I was. And I felt nothing but gratitude. For the second chance I'd been given. For the strength I'd found. For the future that stretched out before me, bright and open and full of possibility. I raised my glass to the sunset and smiled. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning.